Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about powder bronzers and in particular how to choose a powder bronzer that is appropriate for both your undertone and also for the look that you are trying to achieve. So I happen to have about 50 different powder bronzers in various shades from about 20 different high-end makeup companies. And so what I will be doing is showing you swatches of each of these in comparison to one another so you can get a sense of what they would look like if you were to purchase them. And I am still recovering from my broken arm, so it would be difficult for me to shoot arm swatches now. But I was filming this video right before I broke my arm, and so I do have lots and lots of swatches where you can see all of these bronzers in comparison to one another. So bronzers is a category that really confused me quite a lot when I first started to learn about makeup a few years ago. So I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I do think that people have different ideas of how to use bronzer and that the kind of shade that you choose may be really dependent on your intended use. And then in addition, of course, people do have different undertones, and if you don't have a bronzer that is consistent with your own undertone, then it may end up looking really fake. And I think that we are at the point with foundations where people are focusing on undertones, and when you can get a pretty good sense of what the undertone is based on how the company is describing it. I think with bronzers that is much more unlikely to be the case even now, and that many times I am not able to tell at all what kind of undertones a particular bronzer has unless I actually purchase it or unless I go to the store and look at it. So in this video, I am going to be focusing on about 50 shades of bronzers. They are all from high-end or luxury companies. None of these bronzers have fragrance in them or any of the ingredients that I consider to be particularly problematic for people with sensitive skin. And they are all bronzers that I think could potentially work well for some people, but whether or not they work well for me or for you in terms of your intended usage, that may be different. So my hope is that by the time we get to the end of this video, you will have a good sense of which bronzers might be worth considering for you personally. So first, a little bit of information about me. I'm 60 years old and I have very sensitive and dry skin. And in terms of my skin tone, I think that I am on the borderline between what most companies think of as fair skin versus light skin. And although my skin tends to be often described as neutral, I think that it does have what I think of as somewhat of a peachiness to it, and that oftentimes if I see foundations that are described as peachy, those tend to work particularly well on me. So let's talk first about some different ways that people use powder bronzers. So the first one is that for people who have fair skin or light skin, what they may want to do is to give themselves the look of having a bit of a natural tan. And so therefore what you probably want to do if you're going to do this is to find a bronzer that simulates what your skin actually would look like when it gets tanner. So what people tend to find is whatever their natural undertone is when their skin does get more tan, that the undertone does not change a lot. Now I do think that when my skin is really pale, that it tends to be a little bit more pink, and that naturally my skin does get quite a bit more peachy looking when it gets a little bit darker. And so for me, what I am trying to do is to find a bronzer that has a bit of that peachiness to it. Now, a second reason that people may choose to use powder bronzer more diffusely on their face is if they are trying to even out their skin tone. So I think typically people are using some kind of a foundation for that, but if it is a time that you don't really feel like putting on a foundation, it may be possible to get a little bit of that evening out type of a look if you're just using a powder bronzer. And so you may want to use it just really lightly over your face in general, just to make it look a little bit more like not only do you have a little bit of a tan, but also that your skin is a little bit less uneven in terms of the coloring. Now, another thing that people often do with bronzers is to add a little bit of highlighting or color to their face. So in this case, we're not talking so much about a neutral bronze type bronzer, and we may be talking more about a bronzer that has some shimmer in it or that has some color in it, either pink or some reddishness to it or copper type colors. And these are not necessarily bronzers that I would want to use in the same way. I wouldn't want to put a bronzer like like that all over the entire face. I would probably be using that more on my cheekbones or down in the blush area of my cheek. But I do think that these count as bronzers because they can give a look to the skin that's a little bit summery and a little bit almost sunburnt in some cases, that can be really attractive and that do give the look of having been in the sun, but not necessarily just being a tan type of a shade. And I think in some cases with these highlighting type of bronzers, for instance, if you have one that has a little bit of redishness in it, then sometimes people are using them differently than they might a blush. So for instance, some people might be using this kind of bronzer like across the cheeks and then actually across the bridge of the nose, following where the sun might hit your face. And I think that that can be especially pretty. And I think that if we're talking about bronzers that have some redishness to them or some pink color or some shimmer, that there might be a little bit more latitude in terms of the undertones. So in some cases, people that are using those kinds of bronzers, it's more like blush, that even if your skin naturally looks the most at home with a particular kind of blush, that doesn't mean that you might not want to use other shades of blush just to give yourself a particular kind of look or to coordinate with your outfit. And I think that that is probably the case with these highlighting types of bronzers as well. And then finally, people may use a bronzer to sculpt the face or contour the face. And even though it really seems like those types of products should be labeled as being contours, in a lot of cases, companies are promoting products as being bronzers, but they actually turn out to be suggesting that they use them for contouring purposes, and that seems to be the main function of those products. So one thing to keep in mind is that a product that is designed for contouring probably will be a little bit different in terms of the undertones than a product that is designed to give yourself the look of having a tan on the face. So a contour is really often designed to go underneath the cheekbones or along the sides of the forehead or underneath the chin. And so what you're trying to do is to give a look of there being a little bit of a shadow. And the way that people often say to simulate a shadow is by having a little bit of gray in that tone. And also for darker skin tones, it may go a little bit reddish or have a little bit of gray and a little bit of reddishness to it. And so if you're using the product and you're using it in the way that they're intending for you to use it in this area, then that might be perfectly appropriate. But if you try to use a bronzer that has quite a bit of gray in it and you're trying to use it the way that I use a bronzer most of the time, which is to go all over the whole face to simulate a tan, then you may start to look quite different from what you actually would look like if you were actually in the sun, and that might be really inappropriate. So having a pretty good sense up front of what you're trying to accomplish in the bronzer is a good first step, and then trying to figure out for particular bronzers what kinds of undertones they have and whether or not they have that grayishness in them is also really, really important. Now, one other thing that I will say about bronzers is that even if they are not designed to be contours, I think that in some cases I can use them on my neck, and that actually is helpful. So I will just take a small amount of whatever kind of bronzer I'm using on my face in general, even if it has that peachiness to it, and just kind of fill in this area here. And I think in a lot of cases that my neck tends to be even more pale than my face in general. And I also think it's the case that even if it's a little bit darker, that this can draw attention away from whatever lines I have on my neck or whatever kinds of slackness I may have on my jaw, and therefore be a lot more attractive. And hopefully the attention is more going upward so that people are looking at my face rather than paying attention to whatever kinds of problems I might have on my neck. And I don't think that it's necessary to have a gray product for that. I think that a regular bronzer for that purpose works just fine. So after a lot of trial and error early on, what I finally concluded is that the bronzer style that I really feel most comfortable with is the one that is promoted by the makeup artist Gucci Westman, who is from Westman Atelier and who is a celebrity makeup artist that often does covers for Vogue and for other kinds of print publications, and who is known for creating a makeup style that is kind of relaxed and natural looking. So what she suggested is starting out with a matte bronzer, and I would hope that you're choosing one that is close to your own undertone, although in her company she's only offering really one bronzer for people with lighter skin tones. But in any case, using that to kind of darken the top part of your face, so at least going over your cheekbones and over your nose and over on this side of your face. And then you can't see much of my forehead because I have bangs, but I still put a little bit of the bronzer on my forehead. And then for me, I even put just a tiny little bit of bronzer on the bottom half of my face. I don't put as much there because that is not a part of my face that would get as tan, even if I was out in the sun for a long period of time. But sometimes I will put a little tiny bit of that powder bronzer on that part and then fill in my neck a little bit more as well. So I start with that in terms of just simulating a tan, and then I will use a second product to try to create a little bit of a glow and a little bit of highlighting. And so for that, there are a number of different products that I use, but one of my favorites is actually the one that Gucci Westman developed. And this is her highlighting stick, and this is called Lit Up, and this is in the shade Brulee. And this is a kind of a glassy type of a bronzer and has just a little bit of reddishness to it, and it is fairly translucent. So I think that what it is kind of doing is just giving me some hydration to my cheeks, and it looks like I'm not really sweating, but it does look like I have a little bit more of the youthful moisture on my cheeks. And then I will usually put a little bit of that over my nose as well, and maybe a little bit on the Cupid's bow. So as I say, I have about 50 different bronzers to show you, and all of these are appropriate supposedly for light skin or for fair skin, and all of these I think are good enough quality and they don't have problematic ingredients in them. And so I think that depending on what my goals were, and also depending on if I had different undertones, I think that all of these would be perfectly fine bronzers. So the issue that I'm trying to do here is to allow you to zero in on the bronzers that might be especially appropriate for you. And what I have found over time is that it's very difficult, almost impossible usually, to find out what the undertones are by looking at the photography, and rarely are companies giving much details in terms of what the undertones are in terms of their descriptions. And even if I go to a place like Sephora and try the bronzers out on my skin, oftentimes the lighting in those places is not very conducive to being able to see what the products will look like in the real world. And of course, it's hard to compare a bunch of different bronzers when you go to a place like that. I tend to get overwhelmed really easily. So my hope is that if you take a look at some of the information that I have here, then you can zero in on the products that might be especially appropriate for you, and then possibly go somewhere and try them out. Or if you do buy them, then hopefully you will have a much better chance that they will actually work for you than you would if you just kind of went in there blind. So because people that watch this channel tend to be especially interested in the Jones Road brand, I will start off by talking about their bronzers. Now, I am not sponsored by Jones Road. They have not given me any money, and I've spent a tremendous amount of money actually on their products myself, and now they've started to send me a few products in PR. And like almost all of the products that are featured in this video, I do have an affiliate link. So if you click on that link and then you end up buying something, then I will get a small percentage of the proceeds to support this channel. So they have 8 different bronzers available for different skin tones, and I have 4 of those products, and I think that all 4 of the ones that I have would be appropriate for people with light or fair skin. So the first one that I have is the lightest shade, and this is called Dusty Rose. And so this is a shade that is much more pink than most bronzers, and so when this came out, people were a little bit surprised at this particular product because they found that it really was more like a very, very muted blush in some people's opinions. But I also have seen many people, especially people with very light skin, who have tried this on and they've actually said, yes, this is exactly what my skin actually does look like when I get some sun. Now, I was actually not that surprised at that bronzer shade because I was aware back when Bobbi Brown herself was at the Bobbi Brown Company that they had a line of bronzers, and some of those bronzers did have some pinkishness to them. And in particular, there was a shade that was called Antigua, which was actually quite pink, and people were like, what was that person smoking that they think that that was a bronzer? But that it actually, when it goes on the skin, it does give a little bit of a bronzy look. So if you compare the new Dusty Rose bronzer to this Antigua shade is actually quite a bit different. This is quite a bit brighter, and it also has a little bit of gold shimmer in it, just a tiny little bit, whereas this Jones Road bronzer, it's much more matte, and it's much more of like a taupe pink rather than a pink that's actually leaning more towards more of like a mauve pink. Now, the Estee Lauder Company, which is now running Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, in all of their wisdom, they did get rid of that Antigua shade, even though it was kind of a cult favorite of many people. But I did find a substitute for that, so I will show that to you a little bit later on in this video. And then the second shade is called Light Tan. And this shade is one that I think has a little bit of reddishness to it. So it's just a little bit of a reddishness. It's not a really kind of a dark reddishness. But I do think that especially on my skin, that it has enough reddishness that it gives me just the tiny little bit of a hint of having a sunburn. So for my skin, this is certainly not a color that I would use all over my whole face. That would definitely give me a lot more reddishness to my face than I'm looking for. But I do think that if I use just a little bit of it on my cheekbones and then over my nose, it does give me the look of being just a tiny little bit sunburned, which I think is actually really, really attractive in the summer. And that does seem to be how they are promoting this product in the photography. And then the third shade that I have is called Tan, and this is a shade that doesn't have quite as much of the reddishness in it. I think it might still have a little bit of reddishness, and it also has quite a bit of yellow. So I think on my skin it leans way too yellow for me to feel really comfortable using it even as a blush type of a bronzer. So this is not one that I have used much at all except for swatching. But I do think that if you have skin that does lean to be more golden or more yellowish looking, that this could be a really natural looking bronzer for you. And I would still probably think that people might be using it just as a highlighting or a blushy type bronzer, but I think that for some skin tones this could really look lovely. And then the last shade that I have is called Medium Tan, and this is a bronzer that I think also is on the reddish side, and I actually think it leans even more red than the light tan version. And this bronzer is one that when Jones Road was first giving a preview of their bronzer collection, this is the only shade that they introduced, and they were saying that this could really work for anyone, even people with light skin tones, and people really did seem to agree with that. And I think that the reason for that is because it does have this reddishness to it, so you're not probably going to be using it again on your entire face. It's really designed just as kind of a bronzy blush, so it's a lot less reddish than most blushes that are out there, but it does give enough color that if you're using it like a blush on your cheeks, that it will give you that kind of a summertime look that I think is very attractive and gives that slight burned look to the skin. And this is a product that I had been kind of interested in for a while, and so this is the one bronzer shade that they actually did send me from Jones Road because I told them that I was interested in this when they reached out and asked me if there was anything that I wanted. So in terms of the formula, these seem to be fairly straightforward powder products, like a straightforward type of a powder blush. The first two ingredients are mica and cornstarch, and I do feel like these are a little bit more dry than many of the products that I have tried, and that they do kick up a little bit of fallout when I go to use them. And this, even though it's not a really expensive bronzer, it is one that I seem to have the potential of eventually using up, so I think I am tending to use a little bit more of this product when I put it on. I think that if people are just using this as a blushy bronzer, that's probably fine, and that you'll probably get a lot of use out of these products. And I do think that the shades are nice enough that they are worth considering just for that reason. So for these arm swatches, I will admit that doing photography where you get a really, really good sense of the undertones is a little bit challenging when we're talking especially about bronzers. And so what I did for this photography is that I added one particular shade in every photograph that I took so that you could get a sense of how the photos compared to one another. So the one that I chose is one from Kosas, and that is called Beachy, and it does have a little bit of reddishness to it. So you can see that it's a little bit similar to some of these Jones Road shades in terms of the reddishness of that particular bronzer. And you can see when we go to some of these other bronzers that it looks a bit different. Now before we move on from Jones Road, I'll talk a little bit about bronzer brushes because I have one of those that they just sent me as well that I've been playing with. So typically when I put on bronzer, I want to use a really big brush because I am using the powder bronzer really diffusely on my face in general. So the bronzer brush that I have tended to use the most is from the Sephora collection, the Pro collection, and this one is brush number 80, and I do find that compared to most bronzer brushes that are out there, the size of this helps to create a really diffused look on my face where I can just have a really light sprinkling of the bronzer that makes my face look really naturally tanned. Now the bronzer brush that Jones Road sent to me, this one is made in Italy, and it's similar in terms of the size of it, but it has a little bit different of a shape where it's more oblong shaped, and I think that the reason for that is because you can use it, the wide part of it to go really diffusely, but if you want to do a little bit of angling, like on your cheekbones, then you can use it, the oblong part of it, the thinner part of it, so you can get a more concentrated amount of bronzer on a particular part of your face. And so I've been experimenting with that. In general, I am a big, big fan of Jones Road's brushes, and I have several of them that I do really like, and I do think that they are made very nicely, and this one is actually a very nice brush too. Now if you actually want a bronzer brush that is smaller and that is more designed for sculpting, then there are some of those that are labeled as bronzer brushes also. So for instance, Sephora Collection Pro also has one of those, and that is the number 88. So that is not the right brush for me in terms of the way that I apply bronzer, but for many other people that could be a very good brush. And in general, I've had very good luck with the Sephora Pro Collection, and usually during their Sephora sales, which they have twice a year, those products are generally 30% off, so then they get into kind of a good range of affordability. And with BK Beauty, which is another company that I really like in terms of brushes, they have a brush that is called the 103 that I think also could have some potential as being a good bronzer brush. And so now let's talk about another company that I like a whole lot, and that is RMS. So RMS for a few years has had some powder blushes that I really, really like. And then this past spring, they came out with a new line of 4 different shades of powder bronzers that are the same formula as the powder blush, and that have also been very popular and that I also have liked. So these blushes and these bronzers, these are actually not exactly powder products. They are a baked gelée type of a product that is in powder form, but that goes on really so nicely that you can really use your fingers with them. And they do have a little tiny bit of a shimmer in them, and I think that in the blush that just gives a really natural look to the cheeks. And I think that with these bronzers, that it also looks very, very natural as long as I am restricting it to putting it just on my cheekbones or just on this part of my face. But I do feel like if I start to use it more diffusely in my face, and especially if I start to use it on my forehead, that it does give me that look that my face is just shimmery all over and that I might be sweating, or in any case that I'm wearing makeup. So for these bronzers in general, because of that, I would be inclined to just use them as I would a blush or a bronzy type of a blush, and just to put them over my cheekbones and over my nose, and maybe a tiny little bit of it like here. And if I put a little bit of on my neck, I don't think it's so shimmery that that's a problem, but it's not a bronzer that I would use as diffusely as I will use some of the bronzers that I do use. So again, this does come in 4 different shades, and the shade that I think that is the most popular is called Beach Walk Betty. And this is a shade that definitely, again, has just a tiny little bit of a reddishness to it, and it is a fairly muted shade. And I think that this is a shade that really many different people, especially people with lighter skin tones, may really enjoy wearing, because it is easygoing and it is kind of on the road to being a blush as well as a bronzer. And I think that if we compare that to, for instance, the light tan shade of the Jones Road bronzer, that this is fairly similar to that in terms of the undertone. And because it is such a pretty formula, and because it does go on the skin so nicely, this is a bronzer that I've actually used quite a bit when I want to give myself just a little bit of a very, very slightly sunburned or even windburned type of look. And then with these bronzers, RMS has gone more for very distinct undertones, I think. So it is the case for this line that really the only one that I have been wearing on my cheeks or on my face in general is that Beach Walk Betty shade. This particular bronzer, the next one, is called Tan Lines. And Rosemary Swift, I saw her do a long presentation on QVC, and one thing that she did mention about this bronzer is that it has just a little touch of green in it. And I do think that it has a little bit of greenish to it, and I think that in general green is so far from the peachiness of my face that whenever I wear this, it makes me look a little bit weird, like a little bit sick, or like my face is getting a kind of a dirty type of a look that I don't find to be very appealing at all. So I think as an eyeshadow, this is actually quite a nice eyeshadow on me. I think that little bit of greenishness actually works really well with my eye color, but in terms of putting it on my face, it doesn't work for me at all. But if you have a skin that is even slightly olive or leaning a little bit in that direction, then this might be a shade that you really, really like. And then the third shade is called Malibu Muse. And I think that this one definitely does lean quite a bit more yellow. And so that is why I don't feel like that one's all that appropriate on my skin, even as a blushy bronzer. So I think it's fairly similar to the one from Jones Road that is just called Tan in terms of the undertone. So again, if you have skin that has that yellowish type of an undertone, then this might be a really good one for you to try. And then the last one is called Bikini Beach, and I think that this one is more designed for people with much more dark skin tones. And this one, again, has a little bit of that reddishness to it, but I think it also has a little bit of almost purplish in it. And it goes on a little bit more saturated, but I also think that in terms of the undertone, I think it probably would work a lot better on skin that was considerably darker than mine. And what I found in terms of using these as eyeshadows is that both the Bikini Beach and the Beach Walk Betty one, those both do have red food colorings in them. And so I did find that both of those were just a little tiny bit irritating to my eyes, whereas the Tan Lines I actually did not find it to be irritating at all when I used it as an eyeshadow. I think all of the ingredients, other than those red food colorings that are in some of these, that they actually seem to be fine eyeshadow ingredients. And so I feel comfortable doing that. And I do think that if I want to put on an eyeshadow that is very, very simple and that goes on really fast and that I can actually just use my fingers for, and that just looks really kind of pretty and doesn't draw any attention to itself, this is actually a very nice thing for me to put on my eyes, is that Tan Lines shade. So at least I've gotten a little bit of use out of it for that. And in terms of the formula, this actually has squalane, jojoba oil, beriti oil, and sunflower oil in it. So it actually does have quite a bit of moisturizing type elements to it. And I think that that is why these go on so easily, to the point that I can actually fairly easily put them on with my fingers. And these are made in Italy, and I do think that the quality of these is really terrific. And even though I've been trying a lot of other blush recently, I still think that these RMS blushes and now the bronzers are really the standout in the category for me. Now, it is the case that these are in fairly simple packaging, and I actually find that to be very appealing because they are small, and they also are refillable. So if you get to the point where you actually do use one of these up, and I think it'll take a while, but you would be able to purchase a refill for somewhat less money. And so before we move on from RMS, let's talk a little bit about a couple of the RMS blushes. So most of the RMS blushes are quite pigmented and they are not in bronzy type shades, but there are two of the products from RMS that I do think can give the look of a bronzer or a bronzy highlighter. And they are in the way that some of the Jones Road products do, for instance. So the two products that I'm talking about, they both are very, very similar in terms of the undertone, but one is a bit lighter than the other one. So the one that is lighter is called Crystal Slipper, and this one has a little bit of that shimmerishness to it, and it is a kind of halfway between the Beach Walk Betty bronzer and what I would think of as an actual blush. So it just gives a little tiny bit of a bronzer type feeling to the cheeks. It's a little bit more pink. It's a little bit more of a blush, but it's still, I think on certain skin tones, and even on my skin tone, it works pretty well as a bronzer. And then if you want one that has a little bit more pigment in it, then the version of that would be Maiden's Blush. And I think that both of these are ones that work really, really well for me. And that if I'm not looking for a bright blush, which is usually the case, that these are actually really, really nice products. And then Nars is a company that I also really like, and they have a whole bunch of different blush colors, and most of those are very saturated. But there is one that I think is really leaning into this concept of a pinky type of a bronzer that may work well for people that have very fair skin, and that may actually look like they are simulating what their skin would look like in the real sun. And the one that I think works best for that is called Behave, and this is kind of a mauvey type of a color, but it does have quite a bit of a brownishness to it, and I think this actually works really, really nicely for me as a bronzer. And then if you have very, very pale skin, then I think it's possible that this color Sex Appeal might come across on your skin as a bronzer. Just a tiny little bit of a pinkish peach that I think could be really appealing and just give a wisp of the idea of a summertime tan. Now for me, this particular product is almost exactly the same color as my own skin tone, to the point that I could really use this as a finishing powder, and it actually works pretty well as a finishing powder. It actually has kaolin clay in it, so it actually is more oil absorbing than a lot of the other finishing powders that I actually purchased. But I think that this is something that I can feel comfortable using sort of more diffusely on my face in general, and it's not really changing the skin tone very much. But if you have lighter skin than I am, then you might give this one a shot, because it might work for you as a bronzer. And so now we can talk about the Nars bronzers. And the important thing I think to know about these Nars bronzers is that I really don't think they're actually supposed to be what I consider to be a bronzer. I think that they actually are designed to be contours. And if you look specifically at some of the pictures of how these shades are being used, they actually are showing the shades very distinctly being used on this part of the face in order to sculpt the face. And that seems to me to be the case with all four of the shades that I have tried that might be appropriate for lighter skin tones, and I think it's probably the case across the line. Now what we have here, I have this palette which has bronzer shades number 2 and 4 in it. And to my understanding, shade 2 was the original shade, and then all of the other shades in the line were developed sort of based on shade 2, and I think that's why they're all, basically they all still have a little bit of that grayishness in it. So of course some of them are lighter than others, and I think some of them are a little bit more golden than others, and so therefore some of them are a little bit easier for me to use. But in general, I really haven't found that any of these bronzers has been ideal on my skin, and I think that the reason for it is because they all do give a little bit of that grayishness and makes it look a little bit muddy when I am trying to use them in the way that I prefer to use bronzers. So what we have here, this one is the number 2, and then number 4 is in the middle. And although I think that the 4 is a little bit more difficult because it's even more pigmented in general, I don't think that either of these are really that good on my face if I'm using them to try to simulate a tan. And then this one is shade 1. And this one, again, when it goes on my face, it definitely has a little bit of gray. And then this is shade 0, and this one is a little bit workable, but that's really because it's really not doing very much. But I do like the formula for these bronzers. I do think that Nars makes very nice powder products. They're not terribly expensive, and so I think that especially if you're looking for a bronzer to act as a contour on your face, that these are ones to consider for sure. So next we have another one of my very favorite companies, and this one is Maatte, and so they also have several different bronzer available, and I have 2 of these in their powder formula. And the first one is fairly close actually to the Jones Road Dusty Rose bronzer. So again, it's that rose taupe type of a color, and this is M36. And then that's this one here. And then on top of this, this is M37, which is described as a golden brown. So in those particular shades, what I've found is that that golden brown is much, much, much too yellow for me, so I'm not able to wear that one at all. But if you do have a yellowish type of an undertone, then that might work out really, really well for you. And the rose taupe one is one that I can wear in the same way that I wear the Jones Road Dusty Rose, as a little bit of a very muted blush. And then I also have in this palette actually one of their cream clay bronzers, and this one is shade M80, and it is described as a taupe brown. So it is not as pink as the powder bronzer next to it, but I do think it has a little bit of that pinkishness to it. And so I have been able to wear that particular shade on occasion, and I do think that that can be pretty if you're looking for a cream bronzer. And then another product from Maatte that I think is worth bringing up as a potential bronzer is this particular shade in their highlighter line. And it is this one, and it's supposed to be a rose gold. And the shade number for that is M51. It's in the highlighter line. And I think that if in conjunction with a regular powder bronzer that just darkens my skin a little bit, that putting a little bit of this particular shade on can give me a little bit of a highlighting type of a look that is not too shimmery, but very, very nice. And then I mentioned earlier the idea that I had found a shade that I think is quite similar to the Bobbi Brown Antigua shade that has been discontinued. And I think that the one that I have found that I think it's most like is M31, which is this one down here. And so, again, if I'm trying to get that pinky bronze type of slight sunburned type of a look, then this is a really good one to go for. And I think that this is just such a muted blush that in general I feel like it works really well on my skin, because usually I don't want my skin to look like I have a bunch of blush on. I just want it to look kind of natural and understated, and this is a really good color for me to be able to accomplish that. So now let's talk about Kosas. And the Kosas bronzers, first of all, are quite shimmery. And so this is definitely not something that I feel inclined to put on my forehead or anywhere on my face other than where I would put a shimmery highlighter. So it's not as shimmery as many highlighters, but it definitely will give the sense of either wearing makeup or looking like you're sweating if you put it too dispersed on your face. Now, the other thing about the Kosas highlighters is that they have a very odd smell that almost smells like it might be rancid, but when they reformulated it and I got it the day that it was released, it still had that weird smell. So I think it may not be actual rancidity. I think it might be an ingredient in it. And apparently some people don't mind that smell, but a lot of people actually do mind it. And it is one that makes me really prefer not to use it. So between those two things, I really haven't gotten much use out of these Kosas bronzers, which is part of why I decided to use that as a control, because I feel like otherwise this bronzer is really going to waste. So the lightest shade, it is kind of on the peachy side, and so that might be really attractive on my skin tone, but it is quite light, so on me it really just looks like a highlighter. It doesn't really look like I'm getting much bronziness from it at all. And then the shade that's a little bit darker than that, which is called Beachy, that one, as I said, that one has a lot of reddishness to it. So if you're going to use this, then it should be more as a bronzy, reddish type of highlighter, rather than thinking that it's going to be anything like a classic bronzer. Now in the past, Kosas had a line of powder blush and also cream blush, and they had a shade that was kind of halfway between a typical blush and a typical bronzer, and I actually kind of liked that shade. And so I was hoping that they would bring it back when they reintroduced these new powder blushes, that I do really like the formula. But that turned out not to be the case, and there doesn't really seem to be any color in there that really can pass as a bronzer. So the closest one would be this Dreamland color, and I think that this is a nice shade. It has a little bit of a peachiness to it, a little bit of a peachy bronziness to it. But as you can see, this is actually fairly peach on the skin, and it really looks more like a classic blush and less like a bronzer would look. Now also in this slide you can see what used to be really my favorite bronzer of all, and this was from Clinique, and it was called the Powder Pop Flower Bronzer in the color Solar Pop. Now they actually had one shade, and that seems to have been a problem, because even though this product seemed to be a little bit of a cult favorite, it was discontinued, and I think that the reason is because companies really are not supposed to be only offering one bronzer shade. People get really mad about that, and so unless their intention was to create several different shades, they just felt it necessary to get rid of it entirely. But the reason that I really like this bronzer is because it has a little bit of that peachiness to it, and it also had a very, very, very mild amount of a gold shimmer in it that didn't look like it was shimmery, but I think it just added a little bit of life to my face. And so even though I've found some other bronzers that are approximately this shade now that I will talk about, so I'm happy about that, I still feel really lost in terms of this bronzer not being available anymore, because at least for me, this was one of my favorite products. And the Westman Atelier bronzer, it comes in a very, very heavy metal packaging. It's like a paperweight, and it's quite expensive. It's like $75. And I do have a little bit of a fondness for this bronzer because it's almost the same color as the Clinique product. It's just a little bit less peachy and a little bit more of a straightforward brown. But I feel like I can make it work on my skin, and I also feel like I have a little bit of a gratitude towards Gucci Westman, because she explained sort of how bronzer worked in a way that I think has worked really nicely for me, and so therefore I kind of in general do like a lot of the Westman Atelier products. This bronzer formula is a little bit weird, and it after a while it got what almost seems like hard pan on there, and it seems to still work okay. I can still get a look from it, but it seems like it's really changed since I bought it, and it didn't take too long for it to change. And it also has an ingredient in it that is known to be a sunscreen booster, which is an abbreviation of DESM. And I am not sure how I feel about that one. I don't feel like this bronzer has been irritating to my skin, but on the other hand, I tend not to use it very much. So I'm not sure what to think about it. Now, Jane Iredale has come out with two different lines of bronzers over the past couple years. One of them is a line of matte bronzers, and then there is a line of shimmer bronzers. And these bronzers don't seem all that expensive, but you have to realize that you have to buy a case to put them in, because they are only selling the refills, and the case that they are selling costs an extra $20. So by the time that you add that case on, this is actually quite an expensive product. So this is what the case looks like, and it actually is a very nice case, and I actually got this for free with some other Jane Iredale purchases, and so at least it is a very nice case, and I think that if you decide that you like these formulas, then it might be worth it if you go through this bronzer a lot. So in terms of the matte bronzer, there's a few different shades, and I actually think that this product is fairly on the peachy side and might kind of work for me, except that I do think that it has a little bit of that grayishness in it again. And they are suggesting that that can be used as either a bronzer or a contour, and I think that that should probably, when companies say that, that should be considered to be a hint that it probably has some grayishness in it, and that if you are planning to use it as I use bronzer, kind of more dispersed on the face, that it might not really work all that well, and that you might be wanting to limit it more for use as kind of like a contour. Now, on the other hand, I do also have one of their shimmery bronzers, and this one I think has been quite lovely for me. It is quite shimmery, so I'm really only using it the way that I would a highlighter, but it has 4 different colors in it, and I am certainly not trying to only pick up one of these colors in a particular look. I just kind of swipe my brush through all of these colors, and I think that that might give it actually a little bit more dimension. And in any case, it's a very pretty, this color story is actually kind of pretty on me, I think. And this particular shade is actually called Peaches and Cream, and so I think that for my peach colored complexion that this does make a look that looks very natural. It is a little bit shimmery. I think it's kind of obvious that I'm wearing makeup with this, but at least I think it's a very pretty summertime look that I have been trying to get a little bit more use out of this summer because I do really like it. And then I think there are 3 other shades in this shimmery blush, and I think that depending on your skin tone that all of those could be very nice as a highlighting type of a bronzer. And then I have a couple more bronzers on this slide. So the first one is from Bare Minerals, and this is a product that has been out at least 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And this is a quite reddish bronzer, and it is a loose powder form, and this is tremendously messy to work with. So I think that the good thing about it is that if you have very, very sensitive skin, I think there's nothing in this bronzer that probably would irritate your skin, and so this might be something to try. But in terms of ease of working with it, I think that you need to be very, very careful. I think it would be helpful to have like maybe a fan brush, something that you can just pick up a tiny little bit of it. Again, as with most Bare Minerals loose powder products, the idea would be to shake a tiny little bit of it into the cap and then kind of swirl the brush around in there. But even though I kind of like the way it looks on my face, and even though I was getting that kind of burnt bronzy type of a look long before most of these other companies even thought to come out with that kind of a product, in general it is so messy that I would never use it now. But it is interesting how many companies have finally picked up on that concept of the warmth shade, and that they are offering bronzers that are much easier to use in it now. And then the other product that I have that I think is very much like a bronzer is this product from M Cosmetics, and this is called the Heaven's Glow Radiant Veil Blush, and this is the color Baroque. So this does have a little bit of a shimmer to it, so it's kind of about the same amount of shimmer as that Kosas bronzer. But I think that in terms of the shade, I think that this is a shade that's actually quite nice for me. It has a little bit of that peachiness to it. It's a little bit darker than the lightest shade of the Kosas. It doesn't have any kind of a smell in it that I find objectionable. And I think that for many people, this may be a nice kind of a highlighting type of blush that gives kind of a neutral look to the cheek that can be really useful for looks when you don't want all the emphasis to be on the cheeks, and when you're trying to either look really natural or try to direct more of the attention towards, for instance, your eyes or your lips. And now we have Victoria Beckham, and this is a formula that was released when Victoria Beckham launched their company, which I think was in 2019, and that was not really that long ago. But on the other hand, in terms of how fast the cosmetic business has been moving, it really seems like it's ages and ages ago. And I bring this up because I think that although I think this is an interesting concept from Victoria Beckham, I feel like this particular blush formula is becoming really outdated as far as I'm concerned in terms of how it performs. mediums. I think that it performs sort of adequately on my cheeks. I think that I actually am getting a lot more use out of it as a neutral eyeshadow, but in any case, I really don't feel like I've used this product very much at all, and I think that that is too bad because it comes in this really, really gorgeous packaging. So this is glass and metal, and it's refillable, and so if they were to make a product that I really liked, then I would really love to be able to use this packaging more. The other issue for me is that even though they have not yet reformulated it, or even if they were to reformulate it, if they were to still do this same 2 shades, I don't think I would get that much use out of it anyway. Because one of these is supposed to be a bronzer, and one of these is supposed to be a contour. However, also on this page I have swatched the one that has turned out to be my favorite bronzer line of all at this point, and that is from Dolce & Gabbana. And I did not really expect this to be the case at all. I just thought that it would be fun to try something from this line, and this seemed to be the product that had the most potential. And so I was really surprised at how well this particular bronzer has worked, both in terms of my skin tone and also how good the formula has been. So I have 2 shades in this bronzer. So the first one is the shade 01, and I think that this shade does have a little bit of peachiness in it, more so than most of the really light bronzers that I've tried. So I do really like that for my skin. I tend to wear this one more in winter, and I don't think it's so much that my own skin changes that much between winter and summer. Usually when I'm outside, I wear a really good hat that protects me from the sun, and I think that I'm not really getting that much of a suntan in the summer. But I do think that in the summer I prefer to have a bronzer that's a little bit more obvious and looking more like I have a tan than in the winter, where I'm looking like for just something to make my skin a little bit less pale. And in terms of the formula, I think that this formula is particularly nice, unusually so, and it has a couple ingredients in it that I think might be responsible for that. So the first one is that the third ingredient is a hydrogenated vegetable oil, and although that's an ingredient that sometimes makes me a little bit suspicious in terms of this formula, I do think that it gives a lot of moisturizing benefits to this that make it go on really easily and to be spreadable with my fingers. And the other ingredient is called aluminum starch octanyl succinate, and this is also a main ingredient that are in the YSL eye quads that I really love so much. And I think that in those eye quads, part of the reasons why they blend so easily is because of this ingredient. And I do think that this ingredient makes this product also be very blendable on my face and really meld into my skin and to look very, very natural and pretty. And so I'm really happy about that. And then I also did pick up the darker shade in this, and this is called 02. And it's supposed to be for light medium skin tones, but I feel like this is such a blendable product that if I put this on, this works perfectly fine for me too, and it actually ends up looking quite natural. And these bronzers are made in Italy, and in terms of the packaging, I think they're kind of ideal. So they're about the same size as the RMS bronzers, and the functionality is really simple in that same way, and they are refillable, so this whole bottom comes out here. So even though I don't see the refills currently available on the Dolce & Gabbana website, I hope that if they continue to make this line, that they will make refills available eventually as well. So that would be really nice, because I have been getting quite a bit of use out of this particular bronzer. And I don't think that the price is totally out of line. I think that it certainly is expensive, but I think that for something that is a formula that is this good and that has packaging that is this nice and that has a designer name on it, I think that this is actually a really nice product, and this is a price that I am willing to pay for it. So I would say that with this one, the peachiness makes it ideal for me, but that probably if you're someone, for instance, that has an olive undertone, then you may not like that peachiness in it as much, and you might be better off looking for one that has more of a greenish type of an undertone, or at least something that's more neutral. And then moving on, we have Haus Labs. And Haus Labs came out with these bronzers maybe 2 years ago. And for a while, I was really enthusiastic about them because I felt like the formula was really, really nice. And I do think that in terms of how it goes on my skin, that this is a really, really nice formula. It has a lot of very nice skincare ingredients in it. And in general, I seem to do really well with Haus Labs products. I think that their formulas are really good and that they seem to work well with my skin and tend not to be irritating and tend to actually be nourishing for that. And while many of the Haus Labs products are made in Korea, these are actually made in Italy. And in terms of the packaging, I do really like the packaging as well. They are kind of streamlined. They don't seem like they're going to be refillable, but they are thin and fairly nice sized, and I don't feel like they are as annoying as some of the really large bronzers that I've tried. Now, in terms of the color, I realized after experimenting with these for a while and feeling like all the colors basically look the same is that they're basically going for the same concept as the Nars bronzers, that they are thinking that they are really contours even though they are saying that they are bronzers. And it actually is the case that on the Haus Labs website there was a video of Lady Gaga putting this on, and she was talking about bronzing, but she was distinctly putting very, very dark amounts of product underneath her cheekbones. So that is something that I think that all of these shades really do lean into that grayishness a little bit. And so therefore, if you're looking for a contour, then this could be a really good product to consider. But if you're not looking for a contour, then this might not be right for you. But it seems to me that actually Haus Labs is allowing all of their bronzers to go out of stock. And this is also what they did with their blush line. They gradually allowed them all to go away until they were all gone. And then they reintroduced the whole blush line with new shades and new packaging. And so I'm wondering if the Haus Labs is planning to reformulate this entire bronzer line, and that might not be a bad thing. It would be nice if they redid it a little bit so that they had some actual bronzer shades as well as contour shades. And then the next bronzer is from McGrath, and this is from Italy. And unlike almost all of the other bronzers that I'm talking about, this one does have talc in it. In addition, it has mango butter and cocoa butter, so it does have some moisturizing in it. I don't think that it feels bad or dry when it goes on my skin. And it comes in what I think is a nice lacquer container. I think this is attractive and functional. And the shade that I have is called Naked Desire, and I just have one shade. And this is a fairly muted shade, and it also does have a bit of a grayishness in it, so it kind of comes across as a taupe when I swatch it. And I think that when I put it on my skin, it probably would be a very, very nice contour for someone with light skin or even really pale skin. But I think that for the uses that I have bronzer, I have never been able to make this work, and I haven't even really been able to persuade myself that it's kind of working well enough to use. I really have gotten really almost no use out of this at all, except to swatch it several times and to try to figure out why it's not working for me for a while. And next I have the new bronzers from YSL that were released in the spring. So I did a video on these bronzers and the Armani bronzers and the RMS bronzer at the time. And so I have two shades in this. So one of them is called 01, and this one is very light. It's one of my lighter color bronzers, and like some of these lighter bronzers, it has a little bit of a yellowishness to it. So more so than the light shade in the Dolce and Gabbana one, which has a little bit more of a peachiness to it. This one I think is more straight yellow, but unlike most of the bronzers that I've encountered that do have yellowishness to it, I think I can make this work on my skin. I think that it is so light that my skin tone kind of comes through if I don't put on too much of it, and it just gives me a tiny little bit of a sense that my skin is a little bit darker, but I don't think it really does too much on my skin, to be honest. So I think that for people that have very, very light skin, that this could be something to try. I think that this might be one that works well, although if you have skin that's very pink, then I wonder if this yellow would be the most appropriate. And then shade 2 is actually not as yellow, and this is more like a peachy type of a color or a neutral type of a color. I think it's a little bit less peach than the Dolce & Gabbana bronzer. I think that it's a little bit more just straight neutral. I don't think there's green in there, so it's not something that I can't wear or that I think looks problematic on me. I just think it's not quite as much of a good simulation of what my skin looks like when it actually gets peachy. But I don't think it looks wrong. I think it looks perfectly fine. And this bronzer is made in France, and it does contain talc as the first ingredient, but it also contains a couple of special ingredients that I think make it probably softer and a little bit easier to work with, including niacinamide and sodium hyaluronate. And I do think it goes on my skin fairly nicely when I use it with a brush. It may not be my favorite. I don't think it's as good as that Dolce & Gabbana product, but I do think it's pretty wearable. And in terms of the color, I think that the color is kind of neutral enough that I think probably a lot of people do well with those shades, and so therefore that may be another reason why this one is quite popular these days. It does list tin oxide on the ingredient list, and they say that it has a little bit of a shimmer to it, but I really don't feel like this bronzer has any shimmer at all. I feel like it's basically matte, and that therefore I can use it all over my whole face as sort of an overall darkening, rather than needing to restrict it at all to certain areas of my face. Now, in terms of the packaging, you know, a lot of people love this packaging. So this is supposed to be like a YSL purse. So it's very similar to the packaging for the YSL eyeshadows, which is really the only thing that I don't like about the YSL eyeshadows either. So it's quite a thick product, and then it has this artificial leather on the top of it, and then YSL in really large letters. And so if we're talking about types of luxury type products, this is definitely what I consider to be loud luxury, and I don't feel like with all of this plastic and synthetic leather in it that it feels that luxurious to me. In general, this is not the kind of packaging that I like, but some people are really, really crazy about this packaging, and so if this is the kind of packaging that you like, then maybe that's a bonus. It is a little pricey, though. And then once in a while I do find a Fenty product that I think is worth buying, and so I decided to buy one of their powder bronzers, and I think that these are quite popular. It's for sale at Sephora, and so they have a bunch of different shades, and I only picked up the lightest one, which is called Into Sun. And this one is actually a kind of a nice formula. I don't have any problems with the formula at all. This color is very, very light, so I think it is very similar to the lightest shade of the YSL bronzer in terms of both the undertone and also in terms of the depth of the pigment. And so if you have very, very light skin, then this could be one to try. And then next we have Armani. And Armani is a sister company to YSL, and these bronzers launched at about the same time as the YSL bronzers, but I do think that they are a bit different. So they are in this enormous packaging, and it has something like twice as much product in the packaging as really any of the other bronzers that I have, so I found that to be a little bit interesting. I actually really like this packaging. I think that it's probably designed primarily for the Asian market, and this is absolutely the kind of products that I saw really regularly when I was spending time in Asia. And I think it's kind of very, very attractive in terms of the black lacquer-like look in this lid. And it's really, really large, and so it's has a really big mirror in it that's actually very nice quality, and the product, they certainly are giving you an ample amount of it. And I have two shades of this. So the first one is 90, and this one definitely leans quite yellow. And then the second one is 100, and this one is much more kind of neutral. And so I don't feel like either of these are really ideal on my skin, and so that is a large percentage of why I haven't used this product very much at all, even though as packaging goes, I really think this is absolutely terrific. Now there is supposed to be a small amount of shimmer in this, and some people comment on it, and even when I use this in different kinds of lights, I haven't seen that there is so much shimmer in this that is keeping me from using it or using it fairly diffusely on my face. And in terms of the formula, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that Armani is saying on their website that this formula has some kind of a moisturizing element to it. And I'm not really seeing that in the ingredient list, and I am not really finding that to be the case with this formula. So in general, I think that it's a nice formula. I haven't had any problems using it, but I don't feel like I like it as much as the formulas for some of these other products. And then I have a couple of bronzers that are from the clean beauty space that are more affordably priced. So the first ones are from a company called Han, and this company uses all natural ingredients, including all natural colors. And these come in cardboard packaging, so at least they are environmentally friendly. And I have two shades in this. So one is called Malibu, and the other one is called Ibiza. And the Malibu one is a much lighter shade, and it is matte, and then Ibiza is a little bit darker and has a little bit of a shimmer. And they are saying for these products that they can be used as contours or bronzers, and so therefore you will not be surprised that these are actually both quite gray, particularly this Malibu one. I think that this one is quite gray, and that for someone with a really light skin tone, this could be a really nice contour if you want to be contouring things. And then this one that is the Ibiza one, you know, I don't know that something that has that gold shimmer in it would make that great of a contour, but I still think that this product has an awfully lot of gray in it, and more than I would want to use to be wearing it as a bronzer. So in terms of the formula, I think the formula performs adequately. I don't think that I like the formula as much as I like a lot of the other product. And then this one is from a company called Well People, which is another clean beauty brand. And this one I think has a definite reddishness to the bronzer, but it also has a formula that makes it go on really, really lightly. So I think that in order for me to build up enough for me to actually see this on my skin at all, I kind of have to work at it. It really doesn't go on with very much. I don't know if the pigment is light or if it's just hard to pick up this formula on a brush. But in any case, that is a surprise compared to all of the other bronzers that I have. And this is made in China. And one thing that I noticed is that this bronzer is not set in the pan correctly. It's kind of over to the side, so that makes it seem like it's not very well made. But in general, I think that it's not a very expensive bronzer, but I think that it's also one that I haven't used at all. So now I will do a quick review. So I have swatched all of these bronzers on my arms by color family. So what we have here first is the peachier color bronzers, and so you can compare across here. And I think that, you know, all of these do have a fair amount of peachiness to them, and that is why I've been able to kind of make all of these work for me from time to time. But I have ended up personally by liking the Dolce & Gabbana one, and to some extent the Westman Atelier one has been okay, and the Clinique one, I still wish they would bring that one back. And then on the next page, you can see that I have repeated the Clinique one and I've repeated the Kosas one so that you can get a comparison across slides. I think that for these, the Victoria Beckham bronzer part of their two-part compact, and the YSL one, and even this Dolce & Gabbana one, these are all fairly close together. And the End of Sun, really all of these do have some yellowishness to them. I think that the Dolce & Gabbana one is slightly more peachy than the other ones. I don't know that that's coming across that well in this picture. But in general, these are all very light bronzers, and I think that they might be considered to be good substitutes for one another if you do have really light skin or you are looking for a particularly subtle look. And then on the next page, we have a lot of bronzers that are darker, but that do lead decidedly yellowish. And these are all bronzers that I have had no luck with whatsoever, because I think that when bronzers that are too yellow go on my skin, that they just do not create a good look, that they really make me look more like I'm jaundiced rather than that I have a natural bronzy look. And then on the next page, I have all of the bronzers that I think are more on the pink side. And so you can see that some of them are a little bit more obviously pink than others, but that in general that all of these do seem like they would give a hint of a natural looking, slight sunburn type of look for people that have very light skin. And then on the next page, we have bronzers that are reddish and that really lean into that sort of bronzy, sunburned type of a look that some people do find to be appealing in the summer. So I think that for all of these, unless you happen to have unusually reddish skin, that probably all of these are going to be bronzers that you are going to be wanting to use as you would a blush, kind of just a muted reddish type of a blush for the summer. And then on the next page, we have bronzers that are light, and so I think that they are designed for lighter skin tones, but that I think are leaning in decidedly towards having that gray look. So if you're looking for a bronzer that is actually a contour, and you're not really looking to bronze your face, then this is a good list of products that you might take a look at and that I think might work for you. And then on the next page, I think that we have bronzers that are somewhat darker, so they would be more appropriate for skin tones that were more like mine, but that do have a little bit of that grayishness in it, and therefore that might work a lot better as a contour product than as a bronzer. And then the last page, we have bronzers that have a lot of shimmeriness to them. I have here Nars Sex Appeal Radiant, which is a new shade that is designed to be a highlighter, and that actually is quite shimmery. It is the same shade as that Sex Appeal in terms of the matte version, but this one definitely can be noticed on anyone's skin just because it is so shimmery. And then there's the other shades that I mentioned also that I think are shimmery enough that you would only want to be wearing them as a highlighting type of bronzer and not using them any more than that, and also not using them as contour, obviously. So thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of the video. And I would like to know from you how you use bronzer, or how you would like to use bronzer, because that is something that I really don't hear people talk about too much, and I think that that would be really interesting. And in addition, if there are any bronzers that you have tried that I missed in this video that you think that I would want to review for future efforts on this channel, then I would like to hear that. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, then please go ahead and do that. And if you've liked this video, then please do hit like. I guess that helps the algorithm a little bit. And Coco and I love you very, very much. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.